They are the best warriors the Imperium has ever made. The 666th chapter of the Adeptus Astartes, the Chamber Militant of the Ordo Malleus, the demon-hunting branch of the Inquisition. And if you ever see them, you probably won't remember it. The Grey Knights are a chapter of Space Marines in which every single battle brother is a psyker. Their gene seed wasn't derived from any primarch. It was crafted from the Emperor's own genome, and Imperial records treat their genetic lineage as uniquely pure. In 10,000 years of constant warfare against the most corrupting force in existence, the Grey Knights' record of resistance to chaos stands unmatched among the Astartes. Most of the Imperium doesn't even know they're real. That's the paradox at the heart of this faction. The Imperium's single greatest weapon against demons operates under a secrecy regime so total that the people it protects are routinely mind-wiped, sterilized, imprisoned, or killed for the crime of having witnessed their protectors in action. The Grey Knights don't just fight the enemies of mankind. The apparatus built around them punishes mankind for knowing the fight is happening. And the story of how that apparatus works, what it costs, and the one time it nearly triggered a civil war is darker than most demon incursions the chapter has ever faced. The Grey Knights were created during the final days of the Horus Heresy, on the direct orders of the Emperor. He knew what was coming. The war against his traitorous son Horus might cost him everything. And he understood that even if the traitor legions were beaten back, chaos itself would remain an eternal threat. The Space Marines, his greatest creation, had just proven catastrophically corruptible. Half the legions had turned. So the Emperor tasked Malcador the Sigillite, his most trusted servant and the first High Lord of Terra, to find warriors who could resist what the primarchs themselves couldn't. Malcador crossed a galaxy drowning in civil war. He searched corpse-choked battlefields and worlds drowning in blood, and he returned to the Imperial Palace just before Horus's forces laid siege to Terra. Only his psychic mastery and knowledge of hidden ways into the palace allowed him to slip through the traitors' growing blockade around the Sol system. He brought 12 individuals before the Emperor. 4 were mortal lords and administrators who would go on to found the Inquisition. The other 8 were Space Marines drawn from multiple legions, including legions that had turned traitor. These battle brothers had remained loyal. Their psychic abilities had been suppressed under the edicts of the Council of Nicaea, which had forbidden Space Marines from using warp-derived powers. But they were potent psykers all the same. Each had served for a time with the Knights Errant, Malcador's cadre of independent agents operating throughout the heresy. The Emperor surveyed the 12, and according to chapter legend, declared that the 8 Space Marines had a vital role to play in the future of the Imperium, one veiled in secrecy. That phrasing matters. Secrecy wasn't an operational adaptation that developed over time. It was baked into the Grey Knights' founding mandate before a single recruit had been implanted with gene seed. Malcador took the 8 to Titan, the largest moon of Saturn. A fortress monastery had already been secretly constructed there, hidden under layers of rock and shrouded by technologies powerful enough to elude detection by both loyalist and traitor forces while their fleets occupied the Sol system. The Citadel of Titan, carved entirely from basalt, sits at the base of Mount Anarch's shadow, jutting from ice sheets and oceans of liquid methane on a world with 0.14 g gravity and an icy climate. Cryovaults held gene seed stocks. Hundreds of thousands of recruits had been gathered, their minds deeply probed for any trace of chaos corruption, their latent psychic gifts assessed, so that once implanted with gene seed, they would grow into Astartes psykers with extraordinary control over their abilities. Before departing for the last time, Malcador selected one of the 8, Janus, as the first Supreme Grand Master. Then he forged his greatest work of psychic engineering. He wrapped Titan in a bubble of stable reality, weaving a complex psychic ward and sigillic rites of his own devising, and shunted the entire moon into the warp. Titan vanished from its orbit around Saturn. While Terra burned and the Emperor fought Horus aboard the Vengeful Spirit, the Grey Knights trained in a pocket of calm inside the Imperium. When Titan returned to real space years later, time dilation had stretched those years into decades for the people aboard. 8 founding Marines and their raw recruits had become a full chapter of 1,000 battle brothers, trained and ready. They emerged during the upheaval of the Second Founding, and the Inquisition quietly registered them in the records of the Adeptus Terra as the 666th chapter. Their entry was obscured amid the administrative chaos of hundreds of new chapters being simultaneously catalogued, and the only organization to know the Grey Knight's true purpose was the Inquisition itself. What makes them extraordinary enough to justify 10 millennia of enforced invisibility? Start with the psychic aptitude. Every Grey Knight is a psyker, which already puts the chapter in a category no other Astartes force can match at scale. Their librarians are described as possessing a strength of mind far greater than even their fellow battle brothers, wielding psychic abilities freely against demonic entities that would overwhelm a standard librarian. Grey Knights train to fight as small, tightly coordinated units, and their psychic abilities amplify in proximity. They tap into a shared gestalt, combination their individual gifts into effects far more devastating than any single mind could produce. Brother Captain Arvan Stern described their purpose like this: "We are the warriors of the Grey Knights, armored in faith, shielded by devotion, and armed with purity of purpose. But greater even than these, we carry the light of the divine Emperor of mankind into the dark places to purge the demonic wherever it may be found. The dark places demand specialized equipment. Grey Knights carry nemesis force weapons, swords, halberds, hammers, each infused with psychic energy specifically attuned to the destruction of demonic entities. Their Aegis armor is threaded with psychoactive circuitry that channels a portion of their collective psychic might into defensive wards against sorcery and warp corruption. Every battle brother carries a copy of the Liber Demonica in a ceramite case on his breastplate, a gnarled tome containing the chapter's rites of battle, illuminated in silver and bound to a spine carved from the thigh bone of a martyred Imperial saint. These books are psychic talismans in their own right. The chapter doesn't follow the Codex Astartes in force organization. Grey Knights operate in brotherhoods rather than standard companies, each warrior progressing through a series of preordained ranks. Squads are built to operate independently, sometimes light years away from the rest of the chapter, and a brother captain's authority is absolute and unquestioned. Within the chapter, compartmentalization runs deep. The Purifiers, quartered in the Chamber of Purity beneath Mount Anarch, are warrior monks of such extreme spiritual fortitude that they're held utterly incorruptible even by the standards of fellow Grey Knights. They maintain the chapter's most dangerous relics, demonic artifacts locked in gilded stasis caskets, objects too dangerous to study but too powerful to destroy. Grey Knight's lore holds that something ancient and powerful slumbers beneath the surface of Titan itself, kept imprisoned by the Purifier's psychic vigilance and faith. At least one Purifier remains present at all times, maintaining the prison. Above Titan hangs the Apex Cronus Bastion, a void station the size of a small moon, described as one of the most formidable star fortresses in the Imperium. Broadsword Station sits in synchronous orbit, birth of the chapter fleet, its macro batteries angled to fire downward onto Titan itself should the unthinkable happen and the Citadel's demonic prisoners escape containment. The defenses of Titan are described as rivaled only by those of Terra, Mars, and Cadia. All of it, every weapon, warship, orbital fortress, and psychic ward, exists to protect a chapter that operates beyond the knowledge of the Adeptus Terra, most of the Adeptus Astartes, and even, frequently, the Imperium's ruling High Lords. The pennants hanging inside the Citadel of Titan commemorate victories stretching back nearly 10,000 years. None of those campaign names would be recognized by anyone outside the chapter. Under Titan's surface lies a crypt where almost every fallen Grey Knight is eventually interred, their names carved ceremonially into a great basalt wall. Among those names are some of the Imperium's greatest heroes, warriors who died in circumstances beyond imagination. And like all other matters regarding Grey Knights, they remain almost completely unknown. The secrecy isn't vanity. It isn't about protecting Special Forces branding. It's rooted in a specific and terrifying belief about how chaos operates. The Imperium treats knowledge of demons as a contagion. A soldier can fight chaos cultists, heretics, even chaos space marines, and retain their sanity because those enemies can be rationalized as traitors and madmen. Demons can't be rationalized. The Inquisition's institutional position is that the moment a human being truly comprehends that the warp is a dimension of living malice populated by entities feeding on human emotion, that comprehension itself becomes a vector for corruption. Knowledge creates curiosity. Curiosity creates contact. Contact creates damnation. The Grey Knight's existence is hard proof that demons are real. Their weapons, their armor, their psychic abilities, their entire operational doctrine demonstrates that the Imperium is fighting something orders of magnitude worse than heretics with guns. The Inquisition's calculation is blunt. If the masses knew the Grey Knights existed and understood why they existed, the resulting panic and despair would open more souls to chaos than any single demon incursion ever could. Better to sacrifice millions in ignorance than educate billions and watch them turn. The enforcement mechanisms match the conviction. Imperial records describe a process called mind cleansing, a combination of psychoviral agents, electrochemical mimetic intervention, and direct telepathic manipulation used to selectively erase memories and alter thought patterns. The subject's mind becomes a blank slate, and in extreme cases, entirely new personalities and skills are imprinted directly. The mind-wiped are described as effectively reborn, remade with whatever traits the Inquisition requires, sometimes including implanted memories of events and people that never existed. The process leaves subjects hollow, isolated, cold-hearted, and haunted by a sense of dread they can never identify. In rare cases, fragments of the original personality resurface over time, causing psychotic breakdown and requiring further intervention from their masters. Mind-wiping is the merciful option. It's also resource-intensive, which means it's typically reserved for individuals the Inquisition considers too useful to simply execute. For the rest, there is what Imperial euphemism calls final benediction. Imperial Guard platoons present during demonic incursions that require Grey Knight's intervention can be executed wholesale to prevent word of the chapter's existence from spreading. The operational logic is coldly practical. If a demonic incursion was severe enough to require the Emperor's demon hunters, then anyone who was present is either already corrupted or carries knowledge dangerous enough to spread corruption by repetition. The severity scales with the nature of the encounter. Minor engagements against cultists or heretics can often be explained away, attributed to generic rebellion or madness. Witnesses to actual demonic manifestation face harsher measures. Full demon incursions, the kind that make the Grey Knights deploy, trigger the most extreme response. Imperial soldiers who fought alongside the Grey Knights and survived with their minds intact might recall them only as Astartes of an unknown chapter, their unique weapons chalked up to forgotten technology. Other Space Marines who witness Grey Knights in action are described as wise enough not to dwell long in thought about the mysterious Silver Warriors. But not everyone is in the dark. Chapter Masters and high-ranking Inquisitors occupy an exempted tier. Most senior Astartes commanders are believed to know the Grey Knights exist in broad terms, which prevents catastrophic misunderstandings on the battlefield. Logan Grimnar, Chapter Master of the Space Wolves, had called upon the Grey Knights by name before the events that would make him their fiercest critic. The Exorcist chapter maintains a close relationship with the Grey Knights, providing information on potential recruits. Some Ordo Malleus Inquisitors work alongside them routinely. Knowledge expands among elite military and inquisitorial circles. It's the billions of ordinary Imperial citizens, soldiers, and mid-ranking officials who exist in enforced darkness. Even the chapter's own navigators are sealed inside this system. The Grey Knights are served by a dedicated navigator house of the Navis Nobilitae, bound by millennia-old accords. These navigators guide the chapter's void ships through the warp, and they are enshrined on a vessel from birth to death, spending their entire lives aboard Grey Knight's ships to ensure the secrets of where they have gone and what horrors they have seen never leave the fleet. That's the peacetime machinery of forgetting. Comprehensive, institutional, mundane in its bureaucratic thoroughness. But nothing demonstrates the cost of that machinery like what happened on Armageddon. In 444 M41, a space hulk called the Devourer of Stars translated out of the warp in the Armageddon system. Aboard was the demon primarch Angron, favored champion of Khorne, who had once commanded the World Eater's traitor legion. 10 millennia of efforts to reassemble his scattered legion had produced something approaching a coherent invasion force. With Angron came millions of chaos cultists calling themselves the Children of Sanguinary Unholiness, World Eater's Chaos Space Marines, traitor Titan legions from the Legio Vulcanum II and Legio Mortis, and the 12 Cruor Praetoria, the strongest demons of Khorne. Armageddon wasn't prepared. Warp storms had already cut off Imperial communications. Chaos cultists had exploited food shortages to stir armed rebellions in half a dozen hive cities. When the Space Hulk appeared, nearly half the planetary defense force defected to the invaders. Loyalist defenders were routed from the entire northern continent of Armageddon Prime and fell back across the equatorial jungles to the southern continent. Two things saved the planet. The entire Space Wolves chapter, led by Great Wolf Logan Grimnar, was assigned to the sector and moved to reinforce. And Grimnar, as a chapter master aware of the Grey Knight's existence, sent for their help the moment he understood the nature of the enemy. A single company responded. 109 Grey Knights of the Third Brotherhood, under Brother Captain Terramar Aurelian, made swift passage to Armageddon. Their deployment was timed to coincide with a massive Space Wolves counteroffensive along the entire front. While Grimnar's warriors hit the Chaos lines, the Grey Knights teleported directly into the center of the demonic horde, materializing in the midst of the World Eaters and the Cruor Praetoria to reach Angron himself. The fighting was close and savage. Bolter fire punched through ceramite and demon flesh at point-blank range. Nemesis blades carved burning furrows through creatures that existed half in the warp and half in screaming reality. Angron was immense, a towering engine of cornate fury wielding a demonic blade. He tore through the Grey Knights with a brutality that matched 10,000 years of accumulated rage, and the fighting around him became a slaughter. Brother Captain Aurelian confronted the demon Primarch and managed to banish Angron back to the warp. It cost Aurelian his life. Angron would be unable to return to real space for over 100 years. The Grey Knights took catastrophic losses. The Imperium won. The cultist remnants were slaughtered without mercy, pursued across the ash wastes, and overtaken at Minos Bridge. Their bodies were cast into the river Minos and set alight, a funeral pyre visible for hundreds of miles. Then the Inquisition moved in, and the Second War began. The broad outline is clear. The grimmest details vary by account. Inquisitor Lord Gesme Kisneros commanded the post-war containment. He was an enigmatic figure, unaligned with any existing ordo, secretive even by inquisitorial standards, with extensive rejuvenat treatments that made him look like a young man in his 20s, despite wielding authority that suggested far greater age and connections. His attitude to the Armageddon survivors was the standard inquisitorial calculation. Better to sterilize or kill millions on suspicion of chaos taint than risk having to exterminate billions later if that taint spread. The Armageddon containment was put to a majority vote by a conclave of inquisitors present on the planet. The directives were staggering. Many surviving civilians of Armageddon were to be sterilized by injection and quarantined in Adeptus Astartes work camps scattered across the galaxy. This was ordered despite the fact that much of the population was generally considered untainted and had no knowledge of the truths behind the war. The planet's human defenders, the Armageddon Steel Legion, the Planetary Defense Forces, at least 1 million additional guardsmen who had arrived for mop-up operations after Angron's banishment, were ordered into barracks pending their own processing. A similar fate, or outright execution, awaited them. Exterminatus was discussed and rejected solely because Armageddon's industrial output was too valuable to the Segmentum Solar to destroy. Grimnar had anticipated this. He deliberately structured the planet's defense and the Grey Knight's deployment to minimize civilian exposure to demonic truth. That strategy had guaranteed catastrophic casualties among the defenders, both Astartes and mortal, but was supposed to protect the civilian population from exactly this kind of purge. He'd told the Inquisition as much months before the war ended. The Inquisition wasn't moved. Inquisitorial stormtroopers, over 100,000 of them, began evacuating hive cities and herding the population into processing camps. Civilians were told it was a temporary security measure. The injections were described as vaccinations. They were sterilization doses. The Space Wolves had 16 starships in system. The Inquisition had 12. Grimnar's vessels were bigger, better armored, and better armed. 20 transports were loaded with defenders and civilians. Grimnar's plan was straightforward. Get the survivors into the warp before the Inquisition could stop them. The first transport, the Trident of Ilmatha, carried 400,000 passengers, mostly defenders, some civilians. It was en route to the system's warp jump point, escorted by the Space Wolves frigate, Runefire. The Grey Knight's frigate, Carabella, intercepted. It disabled the Trident's warp drive, then scuttled the ship. 400,000 people died in the void. No survivors. These were the first shots of what followed. Grimnar ordered the remaining transports to launch simultaneously, each shielded by Space Wolves vessels that placed themselves directly in the Inquisition's line of fire, with orders not to return fire under any circumstance. If the Inquisition wanted the transports, they'd have to shoot through the Space Wolves to reach them. Cisneros ordered his ships to fire. Before the order could be fully executed, Space Wolves reinforcements translated into the system, led by the battle barge Gilfarheim, establishing overwhelming naval superiority. The majority of the transports made it to the warp jump points and escaped. What followed lasted months and came to be called the Months of Shame. The Grey Knights themselves gave it that name. With witness-bearing transports now scattered across the sector, Cisneros activated what appeared to be an extraordinary cross-sector mandate. Every person, installation, or world that came into contact with Armageddon escapees, even in the most fleeting and temporary manner, was now subject to cleansing. His armada ranged across multiple sectors, and the scale of destruction grew. The planet Tybalt was virus-bombed by Cisneros' flagship, the commandeered battlecruiser Corell's Hope, because an Armageddon transport had briefly stopped at the world's orbital space docks for supplies. Briefly stopped for supplies, and a planet died for it. Grey Knight's vessels participated directly in these operations. The battle barge Fire of Dawn, flagship of the 8th Brotherhood under Grand Master Joros, carried out exterminatus missions during the campaign. Joros had become Cisneros' principal advisor on dealing with the Space Wolves, counseling that the Inquisition should meet Astartes from a position of overwhelming force and steadfastness of purpose. The Space Wolves, following Grimnar's commands, waged an increasingly effective guerrilla campaign, spiriting away transports and dispersing their human cargoes across far-flung star systems. Within the Inquisitorial Armada, dissent was building. Some Inquisitors had voted against the purges from the beginning. The Fenrisian Inquisitor Annika Jarlsdottir of the Ordo Malleus was among the most vocal. The Grey Knights attached to the fleet were frustrated at being deployed outside their mission parameters. In the dissenters' eyes, the campaign's moral rot was compounded by the fact that the Space Wolves never fired first. Grimnar held the moral high ground by refusing to escalate. 5 months in, Grandmaster Joros proposed a plan to capture Grimnar and force the Space Wolves' capitulation. Cisneros arranged a parley at the neutral Hykaran system. Both sides agreed to meet with weapons and shields down. When Grimnar's flotilla, the strike cruiser Scramasax and 4 escort vessels, translated into real space, the already assembled Inquisition fleet opened fire. The 4 escorts were destroyed with all hands. The Scramasax was heavily damaged. Kisnaros invited Grimnar to discuss his surrender aboard the Fire of Dawn. Every Inquisitor in the containment fleet was present, along with their retinues and the full Grey Knights detachment. Grimnar boarded with 3 Wolf Guard. He didn't come to surrender. He came to identify who had violated the sacred oath of armistice. Joros admitted, with a heavy heart, that he had given the order to fire on the Space Wolves' vessels. Grimnar killed him on the spot. The frost axe Morkai crunched through the Grand Master's breastplate and into his throat. A single blow. Joros' life of service to the Imperium ended in a heartbeat. Every Inquisitor in the room prepared to open fire on the Space Wolves. Kisnaros ordered them to hold. Over Joros' body, the Inquisitor Lord alternated between appealing to Grimnar and threatening him. The Great Wolf was unmoved. He treated Kisnaros with open disdain. When the Grey Knights attempted to psychically bind the Space Wolves and prevent their teleportation, Grimnar's Wolfguard shot 4 Grey Knights Justicars who were focusing the collective psychic lock. Their deaths shattered the binding attempt. The Space Wolves teleported back to the crippled Scramasax. Kisnaros, outplayed and broken by the encounter, let them slip away into the void. After that, the Space Wolves stopped holding back entirely. They began actively hunting and destroying Inquisitorial and Grey Knights vessels. The Glaive of Janus, flagship of the Grey Knights' first brotherhood for 10,000 unbroken years, was lost with its entire crew and a complement of over 50 veteran Grey Knights. 10 millennia of history gone in a single engagement, not against demons, but against fellow servants of the Emperor. The Inquisition brought in reinforcements. The Red Hunters Space Marine chapter joined Kisnaros' armada at full chapter strength. The conflict spiraled toward the brink of genuine civil war before an uneasy truce was reached in early 451 M41, following an orbital confrontation over Fenris, the Space Wolves' homeworld. Kisnaros was killed. The broader institutional dispute between the Space Wolves and the Inquisition was never truly resolved. Grimnar never forgave what was done. Many of the civilians of Armageddon who weren't smuggled off-world were sterilized, separated from their families, and sentenced to labor in work camps until they died out. A new population was brought in to resettle the planet. The industrial output continued. The secret was maintained. That's the secrecy machine operating at its grimmest. Not isolated mind wipes, mass sterilization and work camps. Worlds virus-bombed for the crime of geographic proximity. A transport carrying 400,000 people scuttled in the void. The Grey Knights' own 10,000-year-old flagship destroyed in a war fought against Imperial allies who objected to the mass punishment of untainted survivors. And even some within the Grey Knights' own ranks recognized the campaign for what it was, naming it the Months of Shame. Dissenting Inquisitors spoke against it. Grey Knights expressed frustration at being used as instruments of a purge rather than demon hunters. The system didn't care. The doctrine held. The Inquisition's defense is internally consistent. They invoke the Horus Heresy as proof that exposure to chaos can metastasize into treachery on a civilizational scale. Half the Space Marine legions turned. The Civil War nearly destroyed the Imperium. The Inquisition treats that catastrophe as a permanent object lesson. Ignorance isn't cruelty, it's prophylaxis. Every Imperial citizen who doesn't know demons exist is one fewer potential vector for corruption. Every mind-wiped soldier is a life preserved rather than ended. If a Grey Knight commander orders the destruction of a passenger liner to ensure the banishment of a single demon hidden aboard, the chapter's own doctrine states he does not act from callousness, but from pragmatism. If millions must be sacrificed to save billions, then so be it. The Grey Knights exist in a tension between their mission and the machinery built around it. They are warriors of extraordinary courage and sacrifice. Catastrophic losses on Armageddon, decades of training on a frozen moon orbiting Saturn, their names carved into basalt walls that no one outside the chapter will ever read. Their navigators live and die aboard Grey Knight's warships, never permitted to set foot anywhere the secrets might follow them. Their victories go unrecorded. Their dead rest in crypts no outsider will ever visit. But the system that keeps them secret has its own body count. The mind-wiped are left hollow, haunted by dread they can never name. The executed were given no explanation. The Armageddon survivors sent to camps labored until they were gone, replaced by settlers who would never learn what happened to the people before them. Tybalt was virus-bombed because a ship paused at the wrong dock. 400,000 passengers aboard the Trident of Ilmatha were killed to prevent the possibility that someone in the hold might one day mention a silver-armored space marine they saw through the smoke. Humanity's greatest shield against demons requires destroying the minds, memories, and lives of the very people it saves. The Imperium can't afford to lose the Grey Knights. It can't afford to let the galaxy know why it needs them. The chapter exists in enforced invisibility, its victories unrecorded, its heroes unknown, its protectees punished for having been protected. And the system that enforces that invisibility is willing to sterilize entire populations and scuttle ships full of loyal Imperial servants, then call it mercy. Whether the cost is worth what it buys, survival, continuity, the thin membrane of ignorance keeping 10,000 worlds from falling into despair, is a question no one inside the Imperium is permitted to ask. The Inquisition would mind-wipe you for thinking it, and the Grey Knights exist inside a system that allows them to. That might be the darkest thing about the 666th chapter. Not that they fight demons, not that they've never broken under the weight of the warp, but that the institution keeping them hidden operates with a brutality that mirrors the evil it claims to oppose. And the galaxy will never know enough to judge whether that trade was worth it. Subscribe for more.